Now, the growing amounts of money being promised in disaster relief have rather overshadowed what Tony Blair had intended as the main foreign theme of 2005. He wants to use Britain's leadership of the G8 group of wealthy countries and then of the European Union to force help for Africa, which he once called a scar on the conscience of the world. He's already set up a so-called Africa Commission. But not even all Africans are persuaded. Ghana is supposed to be something of a model, but the Ghanaian campaigner Yao Graham believes the Prime Minister ought to save his breath and think differently. We asked him to make us a film.
Ghanaians have good reason to be celebrating another new year. For 20 years, my country has enjoyed political stability and economic growth. Tony Blair and other Western leaders hold Ghana up as a model for the rest of Africa. Now, he has announced a commission for Africa. For Blair, expressions of concern for Africa are a constant, especially when he can maximize the spin value.
I have very few expectations of this commission. We don't need another commission to tell us about Africa's development problems and what has to be done for the continent to move forward.
To me, Ghana shows what is wrong with Blair's vision for Africa. Across the continent, his model is fueling social marginalization. Few productive jobs are being created, and increasing numbers of the poor are ending up like this after leaving the countryside to look for work. Ghana's growth is actually underpinned by volatile primary exports and massive conditional aid. Unemployment is growing as imposed trade liberalization damages both agriculture and manufacturing. Foreign business is favored over local ones.
So over the past 2 decades, this market has really grown. The country is the biggest importer of used clothes in Africa. That's an interesting point because normally as the economies grow and people's living standards improve, you see that reflected in what they eat and in what they wear.
The productive roots of the economic growth are weak. These women are reshaping imported second-hand clothing, which are undercutting locally produced garments.
Okay. What he's saying is that there are no Ghanaian items here. The supplies are all imported, and they are primarily from North America and from Britain.
In Accra's main market, 45 different types of imported tinned tomatoes are on show. European Union subsidies have made them so cheap that the local processing industry has died out. Large numbers of food farmers live in poverty because they earn so little from their labors. The government has been unable to protect local food production because of conditions imposed on it by donors. For food producers, our demands are simple. The donors must get off the back of the government so that more food can be produced locally, reducing spending on imports and boosting the local economy through the creation of jobs.
If you're allowing a trade policy that allows subsidized products to come onto my market, you are denying me access to capital because investors are not going to provide me with capital if they know that I'm not in a position to produce at a competitive price. The government took one step forward and then a step back. We managed to get legislation passed which effectively increased the tariffs on these products. The European Commission stepped in, and also from our investigations, the IMF, and this increase in tariff was reversed within 3 weeks of it becoming a law.
Countries should be free to make their own development choices. The West is trying to kick away the ladder that it used to get where it's got to internal development. People deserve to have an equal opportunity. And this, for us, really is a test of credibility facing Western leaders such as Tony Blair.
Africa's current share of world trade is a story of lost potential earnings and resultant damage to the lives of millions of its citizens. What Africa lost from the fall in export prices in the years up to 1997 could have raised incomes across the continent by as much as 50%. Blair and his G8 colleagues have been loath to address this problem. With factories closing, Ghana is looking for new areas of growth. Unfortunately, one boom industry does nothing for economic development. Factories are being put to a new use, the enterprise of spiritual redemption instead of material production, the explosive spread of evangelical Christianity, another example of globalization in Ghana. Ghana is currently undergoing a rural electrification program. Surely, an opportunity for local manufacturing to benefit. At least it should be.
The money for electrification is not coming from the government's own resources. Most of it is coming from donors. And sometimes these donors require that the products come from their countries. So they provide the money and they insist that you buy products from their countries, which leaves us here out of the equation. Quality is not a problem. What we have here, our products are certified to all the international quality standards that cable manufacturers anywhere have. So as far as quality goes, we are okay.
The talk always is that, well, the aid is meant for you to do what you want to do. But it doesn't always work as easily as that. Because of some of the conditions that are created. I mean, strategies for poverty alleviation are quite different from the strategies of growth and wealth creation. So if we are able to mobilize resources on our own, it gives us more flexibility to determine exactly what we want to do to be able to realize our development vision.
Wealth has been created in Ghana, but only for the favored few.
Business is booming for those catering to the rich, many of whom are making their money in the import trade. But the externally imposed policies driving the growth are widening the gap between rich and poor.
This gap will get bigger as the government continues to comply with Western demands. This week sees the inauguration of President Kufuor at Accra's Independence Square. He has pledged to reduce poverty in his second term, but I think he cannot possibly fulfill that promise and stay the star pupil of the West. Currently, the European Union, under the leadership of Blair's best mate, the Trade Commissioner Peter Mandelson, is trying to impose trade rules on Africa more destructive than anything we've seen before. The two previous Africa initiatives by G8 hosts have yielded very little, so why should we expect anything from Tony Blair's Commission for Africa?
Africa has experienced a long trail of high talk, failures, and double standards from Western governments and leaders about its economic development problems. Tony Blair has been part of this sorry tradition. The Commission for Africa is more likely to be a balm for Tony Blair's conscience than something that will yield a miraculous set of policies and change of direction in relation to Africa's development problems.
Well, we're joined now by Sir Nicholas Stern, who is Director of Policy and Research at the Commission for Africa. It is pretty appalling, isn't it, that a model state in Africa, so-called, could produce a picture that is that unhappy in so many respects.
The position in Africa is extremely difficult, and that's why the Commission, one of the reasons that the Commission for Africa has set up. But I think he was too negative, both about Africa and about Ghana. I mean, Ghana has been growing reasonably well over the last 10 years or so, and the reason I think that's most important for the Commission for Africa now is that there's been significant change in Africa over the last 10 or 15 years. You've got better governance, even though it's very weak in many parts, it's getting better. And you've actually had growth in Africa, many parts of Africa, over the last 10 years or so, which we didn't see before. The tragedy is, of course, that it's from a very low base, and the tragedy is it doesn't cover anywhere near enough of Africa.
If I simplified what he had to say, I think he's saying right off the debt, right off the tariff barriers that we face, and leave us to get on with it. Is that a viable possibility, or is it even something you're likely to recommend?
I can't speak for the Commission for Africa because it hasn't reported yet. It won't report until March. But we can see the way the Commission for Africa has been having its discussions, and it has been very concerned with the trade issues, and those are extremely important. I mean, for example, the average cow in the European Union has been getting a subsidy of about $2.50 a day, whereas nearly half of Africa lives on less than $1 a day. Those trade barriers are very serious, and I think it's extremely important that as aid is increased to Africa, as it should be, that those trade barriers come down and that Africa is able to export more readily and Africa doesn't have to face dumping. So there's a connection there between the trade story and the aid story, but both are very important. There's a connection with the debt story. Africa's paying $9 or $10 billion a year out in debt service and getting $20 billion or so in aid, and that's a big slice. So those stories of aid, trade and debt hang together, and it's important to act across them all.
But if the Commission for Africa were to decide that it was ludicrous that European cows were getting that sort of subsidy and African people were getting the lack of subsidy that you refer to, could it actually do anything about it? It can make a recommendation, but that's it.
It can make a recommendation, but what we need is political force behind the argument, and we need decisions. And that's why we have a chance in 2005, because we have, as the UK, the chair of the G8 and of the EU. So there's a chance from the chair to put forward clear, strong stories, clear, strong policies, and to have the decision makers react on them. So it's very important that the Commission for Africa puts a powerful, strong case together, and a case that has the backing of Africa.
There's no guarantee it would get anywhere, though, is there?
There's no guarantees in this business at all, but there's a special chance now, and I think it's for the reasons I described, that Africa is changing, and many parts of Africa are starting to get in place better policies and better governance. There's a very long way to go, and it's fragile. But now is the chance where a strong action can make the difference between success and failure in Africa.
Another thing that many Africans are pretty upset about is the way in which international organizations have insisted upon privatization, for example, or private enterprise performing functions previously performed by the state. They say that that benefits very often foreign private companies. It does nothing necessarily for the locals.
I think it's quite wrong for outsiders to try to dictate to Africa or any other country. It happened a lot in the 1980s, and I think people are starting to learn the lessons from that and are starting to move away from insisting on very strong conditions towards getting behind Africa and backing those people and countries which I described who are moving strongly.
But that's what they said in justification when they actually imposed the privatization conditions.
They said what?
They said that they were doing it in the interest of the people of Africa against corrupt, incompetent governments.
Yeah, what we've learned over the last 15 or 20 years as a development community, as people trying to move development forward, is that insisting and pushing and trying to dictate does not work. It's not only the wrong way to behave, it's the ineffective way to behave. And what you have to do is try to get behind those countries which are moving in the directions of trying to fight poverty effectively for their people. Yes. And the Commission for Africa is made up, I should say, of more than half Africans, senior African people who are experienced. So it's going to be a view which is a joint African view, indeed a majority African view, together with those from outside. So that's the basis that we're trying to create.
Nicholas Stern, Director for Policy and Research at the Commission for Africa. Thank you.
Thanks very much.